Hey, everybody. I hope you guys are having a really great Sunday so far. We've got our windows open and we're just loving what this day is bringing today. Hope you guys had a good week last week too, and hope that at this point in our quarantine that maybe you guys are finally hitting a stride, finding some cool hobbies and things to stay busy as you just kind of hang out at home, maybe finding a routine that works really well for you. Hope those things are happening for you. Hope those things are going well for you. And really excited to talk about atypical families once again. So last week we introduced the idea of atypical. We introduced the idea of what a different family would look like if everyone was just sold out following Jesus and loving other people because of Jesus. So as we look at that this week and the next 2 weeks, we're really excited to unpack some of the ways that we can be atypical families, some of the ways that we have seen that in Scripture, and the way that that would just impact us and those around us. And last week we talked about Adam and Eve. We talked about Cain and Abel. We talked about how that family was used by God, even though they made some really big mistakes. That they were still important. They were still meaningful to the overall story of the gospel, and that God would still choose to use them through really bad things that they did. Um, this week we're talking about a family in Genesis, one that's just a little bit after Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve, and that is Abraham and Lot. All right, and I think this is an uncle-nephew relationship going on here, but these two people refer to each other as brother at some point in this book, and we're in Genesis 13 to start, and Abraham isn't actually even Abraham yet. And there's a really cool story and passage of how that actually kind of plays out, where God kind of changes his name, and he changes like his storyline. He changes his narrative. He changes what the purpose for Abraham's life is going to be. And so he switches from Abram to Abraham. But we start with Lot and Abram, and they're really close family members. They are living nearby each other. They're interacting a ton. Like I said, really close. And we get to a point in Genesis 13 where all they're doing is fighting. All right, and they both have kind of established themselves, and Abram has a ton of belongings and livestock, and they're kind of like just living on top of each other, and their servants, their workers, their staff, their tribe are all kind of interacting at this point too, and Lot and Abram kind of butting heads and fighting. That's kind of like wearing off onto their staff and the people that help them day to day. And those people are starting to fight too. And so now we see these two guys that are living just kind of on top of each other, and it's just not going well. So they come to a conclusion that they're going to split up and they're going to get some space. Maybe that's been you at some point in your life. Maybe you and a sibling shared a room at one point, and it just got to be too much. Maybe your parents were like, "We can't handle the yelling. We can't handle the punches flying, and we got to just like get you guys your own space, or get you guys into your new activities." And maybe even in quarantine right now in social distancing, that's even tougher, because you don't have your sport to go to. Your sibling doesn't have their class or their activity to go to at the same time, so you guys aren't kind of split up or spread apart. And we see just a very similar situation playing out in Genesis 13 with Lot and Abram. So they kind of split up this land and they go their separate ways. And in Genesis 18, we kind of hear back from them. And Abraham is now Abraham. His story has kind of changed and shifted. And he's living with his wife, Sarah. And they're doing really well. And the Lord is just blessing them in a lot of ways. And they're finding that they're going to be a big part of the rest of creation and impacting nations, and being kind of the hub of this godly nation that branches out long term. But Lot is not living in that kind of place right now. He's living in this area with Sodom and Gomorrah, these two really evil, really hurting cities, really broken cities, where there's just a lot of wickedness just a ton of bad things that are happening left and right. And Abraham kind of learns that God is kind of aware of how bad the city is, and he just starts to go through this process of remembering this close relative of his that all they could do was fight, all they could do was argue. They just couldn't ever see eye to eye, and all they were doing was just disagreeing. And he gets to a place where he realizes um, that he cares so much for Lot, and he starts to pray for Lot. So he starts to talk to God about Lot. He starts to plead for Lot. Starts to ask for protection over Lot. Starts to ask for for God to spare Lot and his family, because he just cares for him so much. Even though they haven't talked for years, even though they haven't really kind of buried the hatchet, if you will, they haven't really moved past their disagreements. They just kind of went their separate ways. But Abraham starts to just pray for this family member, um, of this relationship that's kind of tarnished and broken and hurting, and hasn't been mended for years and years. So we see just this really faithful follower of Christ, and that we see this really faithful lover of God, that he would reach out to God to pray for a family member that he's kind of at odds with, which is really cool. So that happened in Genesis. And now that kind of opens the question of what would that look like for us today? What would that look like if we started to do that and we started to pray for a sibling or a family member, as we're kind of sitting here in this situation in this season, but furthermore, just as we go through life, and what prayer would do for our families to impact and change the narrative, to switch this maybe a dysfunctional environment to a positive environment, one that is just proclaiming God through everything. So we've got some ways that you guys can be praying for your families, as we kind of just practice this through this season, and start to maybe introduce some new things to you, to our family systems, as we just kind of walk through this together. All right. So some ways that you guys can be praying for your family during this time. You can be thanking God for them. So as you just sit there in your house and they're all around you, you can just be thinking of how lucky you are to have this family. And maybe this will just require you to take a look at the positives. Maybe you'll have to forget the words that were said the day before. Maybe you'll have to forget the argument that just happened. But just think about the positives and think about how blessed you are with your mom or your dad, with your siblings, with your dogs or cats, with your cousins and uncles and stuff like that, and just thank God for those people in your life, and what they've meant to you, for your life so far. Next, you could be asking God to give you fruits of the Spirit as you just begin to interact with them. So things like love, joy, peace, and patience. Maybe you know that Thursdays are always really rough because you're just kind of working next to your sibling, and maybe Fridays you don't have school. So maybe on Wednesday night you could just say, "Hey God, tomorrow I have to sit next to my younger brother as we do school for 6 hours, and I know it's just going to be really annoying. He's going to kick me. He's going to tap his pencil. He's going to do something. And Lord, I just pray that you would help me through that. That you would just give me an abundance of patience, where I could just hear from you during that time, and less of my initial reaction of to just like turn the table over and throw it or something like that." So you could be praying for patience. You could be praying for love. You could be praying for peace. Maybe that's after being grounded or something like that. Maybe after just kind of hurting your relationship with your parents by disobeying them. You could be praying for them in that, and praying for yourself as you maybe learn to be more joyful around them, show peace to them and to the rest of your family, as well as love. You could be asking God for wisdom in resolving conflict. So as maybe you and your siblings, or maybe you and your parents just aren't getting along, maybe for just a day or maybe a week or so, or maybe throughout this whole season, just kind of living on top of each other. You could just be praying to God, Lord, this is something that just keeps happening. Lord, please help me to find better ways to maybe communicate, better ways to apologize, like give me strength to apologize sooner, um, better ways to resolve the conflict when it's over. And so maybe if there's something that's reoccurring, or maybe there's something that you just continue to do, you just be praying for that, that aspect of the conflict of God, I really don't want to hurt my parents anymore. If you could just help me be more attentive when they're talking to me, help me listen better, to maybe avoid some of these conflicts, that'd be great. You could be asking God to do the same with your family, and so maybe you're not even the one fighting. Maybe it's your younger siblings or your older siblings. Maybe it's your parents, and you're just kind of sitting back as those fights are occurring. You could be praying for them in that, just like, Lord, I just pray that you would help these family members of mine remember that they love each other a lot, and to maybe think more about the words that they're saying before they come out, and to be more patient with each other, to be slower to anger, so that they don't just kind of flip with one thing being said, but that there's a long conversation before anything gets heated, and they're able to kind of resolve that and squash out that fire before it starts. And next, you could be just thanking God for helping your family during this time, providing for your family and their health during this time. And so, just remembering how privileged and blessed we are right now with our health, with our provisions. And so, maybe you just thank God for having your parents work from home right now, or if that isn't happening, maybe just thanking God for providing during this time while that isn't happening, providing for your family's health, as we just kind of remain social distance right now, and just helping your family maybe not fight a ton during this time, and just kind of respond in a positive way. So I want you to think about those things and how you can be doing that, but also think about what it would look like if you did that long term. So what would that look like with your relationship with your sibling if maybe you guys are fighting a lot, and what you start to do is you start to just enter into this mindset of, how can I pray right now? How can I pray after a fight? How can I pray the start of the day, or the end of the night, to kind of respond better to my sibling? Those things are going to get noticed long term. Your sibling is going to be like, what is with her, or what is with him? And they've changed. They're different now, and you guys can start that. Maybe that's just praying for your family, and just kind of your family dynamic. Maybe it's more of a functional family dynamic that you're praying for. That your family can just be one that responds better to one another, that cares for each other better, is just a little bit more warm and patient, especially during stressful times such as these. You can just be praying for those things, but those things are going to just shape your attitude. Just entering into that prayer mindset, that's going to change your attitude. That's going to change your mindset, your perspective, and that's going to be really impactful. And your family is going to be affected by that one way or another. Maybe that's not tomorrow if you did it today. Maybe that's maybe not next year, but over time, those things are going to feed into your family. They're going to produce some really positive fruit within your family dynamic, and it's going to mean a lot for you and for your family moving forward. But just know this before we go. Just know this: it starts with you. All right, you can hear all these things, and you can say that's great, but it starts with you. You can't just count on your sister or your brother doing this. You can't just count on your parents deciding this one day. It starts with you. And if you would lock in and think about being atypical, if you lock in and think, how could I be different in a positive way? How can I be different for loving God and loving my family, and those things coming together and coexisting? What would that look like for my family? Well, it starts with you. Okay. So as you guys just think about that this week, I just pray that Lord would speak to you in specific ways, that He would show you ways that you could care for your immediate family, your distant family. And guys, I hope you have a great week, and I hope that this said something to you today. All right, take care.